Hey there, it's Steve from Serious Keto, and from time to time I get asked what my opinions are on resistant starch. The premise behind resistant starch is that if you take a starch, such as a potato or rice, cook it, and then cool it for an extended period of time, like 24 hours or more, the starch becomes resistant, and supposedly it won't affect your blood glucose. It sounds kind of a little bit like magic, and I don't know that I believe it. Resistant starch is something I first found out about back in, I think it was probably January of 2019. This was when I was emulating what Penn Jillette did in his book Presto, and I went 2 weeks of eating nothing but potatoes. And at some point, I think I stumbled onto a Joe Rogan podcast, and a guest was talking about resistant starch and the benefits that it has on the gut biome, that your gut biome really likes that, all the good bacteria down in your gut. And I believe that to be true. My evidence is only anecdotal, but a couple of years prior, on a business trip to India, I got very sick and had to take ciprofloxacin, which is the absolute nuclear option when it comes to antibiotics. It wipes out everything, including all the good bacteria. And my gut biome was a mess. I know this from every trip to the bathroom that I made. And after going through this potato fast, or potato famine, as Penn Jillette called it, things got better. So I'll buy into the notion that resistant starch is good for your gut biome. But the big question for those of us doing any sort of a low-carb diet is, will this affect our blood glucose? Will it knock us out of ketosis? And rather than me doing probably a not great job of explaining resistant starch, I'm going to link to a few articles down below that do it better. One is by Dave Asprey of Bulletproof. The other is by Mark Sisson, who is a keto advocate. And then the one that really kind of surprised me is from Johns Hopkins Diabetes Center. So you may want to hit pause on this video and read one or more of those articles just so you have a more thorough understanding of resistant starch and what it is that I'm testing. I have thought about doing this video for well over a year, and the reason I haven't done it is twofold. First, if I'm going to kick myself out of ketosis, I want it to be for a really good reason, not just for a potato or a bowl of rice. Furthermore, both potatoes and rice are things I've kind of gotten out of my system. I don't really have an addiction for them anymore. I've lived without them for well over a year. I could live without them probably for the rest of my life. So in a way, I feel a little bit like Ewan McGregor in Trainspotting when he goes back to using heroin again. Maybe that's a horrible metaphor. But I am today actually going to do it. I'm going to first cook some potatoes. I've already baked the potatoes, I've chilled them, and I'm going to cut them into slices and fry them up in some tallow. I'm going to test myself under the same real-world conditions that I would actually eat potatoes. I'm going to do a baseline blood glucose and ketone reading. I'm going to eat the potatoes. Then I will do blood glucose readings at 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and 2 hours, and I will also do a second ketone reading at that time as well. I have also cooked up some basmati rice, and that is in the fridge and has been for a couple of days. Depending on what happens with the potato experiment, I will then test out the rice. Ketones are at 1.1, and it is 8:48 a.m. Blood glucose, 96. So there's our baseline. And I'm just going to cut this into slices, and then into some tallow. And here are my potatoes, 185 grams or 6.5 ounces. Put a little pink Himalayan sea salt on them. All right, potatoes. Haven't done this in over a year. That tastes pretty good, but not so good that I want to get kicked out of ketosis for it. So I'm on the third one right now, And I'm already getting kind of sick of it. I think when a person says that they love potatoes, what they really love is all the stuff you put on a potato. A potato is just a delivery mechanism. And the last bite, it's 9:15. For something that tasted so good on the first bite, that was absolute misery by the end. I think I could safely say this is the worst meal that I've had since January of 2019. I would have so loved to just have some ketchup or some malt vinegar, some sour cream, anything. But to keep this test nice and clean, that's all I had. We'll be back in a half an hour to check my blood glucose. It's been just about 30 minutes, so we're going to take our first blood glucose reading post potatoes. Now, one thing I can tell you that's been going on for the last half hour is I have been burping a fair amount. And this hasn't been like a thing that I do. Like gas has not been a thing for me since going keto. We'll have to see what happens as this works further south in my body. Here we go. We are at 137, a half hour in. Now, according to Andrew at Keto Mojo, a jump of over 30 points is a spike. This is a spike. This is a jump of 40 points. Generally, I find that if something is going to be really bad on my blood glucose, it hits me the worst at about the 1 hour mark. So we'll be back in a half hour to see what that number looks like. We are at the 1 hour mark. Blood glucose test. $191 at 10:19. That is a spike. All right, we'll be back in 1 more hour to see how we are at the 2 hour mark. And we are at the 2 hour mark. So we're going to do a blood glucose and ketone test. First, the blood glucose, 105 at 117. So glad to see that drop, but man, what a spike that was. And now our ketones. Down to 0.7. So it will be interesting to see, based on going back to a regular keto eating pattern for the rest of today, what my ketones are in the morning. So I've spent about the last half hour sort of waffling over whether I should do this with the rice or not. And I thought, I could wait till tomorrow, make sure I get back into ketosis, stabilize my blood sugar again. But then I thought, if I'm going to knock myself out of ketosis, if I'm going to feel like garbage, why not just pack it all into one day? So right here, I have 1 cup of basmati rice that has been cooked and cooled and recooked. That is right around 140 grams. And because I don't know that I can just choke down a bowl of plain rice, I'm going to put on some furikake seasoning. 0 net carbs, it's just sesame seeds and some seaweed. At least give me a little bit of flavor here. I've never had furikake, and I'm going to officially label it an acquired taste. I managed to take something really bland and make it taste worse. This tastes like low tide smells. If nothing else comes out of this experiment, at the very least, I think I have cured any potential desire I would have for potatoes or rice for the rest of my life. All right, essentially down to the last bite here. We have a new champion for worst thing I've ever eaten. Oh boy, that was really, really awful. I feel like I should be arrested for the attempted murder of my tongue. That was really not good. So let's see, right now it is noon. I will do blood tests at 12:30, 1 o'clock, and 2 o'clock. See you shortly. All right, it is close enough to 12:30 that we are going to do our blood glucose test. We are at 114 at 12:29. So not a whole lot of movement from the 105 that we were at earlier. The big bump always comes at the 1 hour mark. So I will be back in another 30 minutes. It's just a little bit before 1, so we are going to grab our next blood glucose reading. And we have 125 at 12:59. So kind of interesting there. I mean, 125 is still a high number for me, but it's still less than 30 points higher than my baseline. So a bump, yes. Close to a spike, yes. I don't know how much of that is still residual potato that's in me, but I guess when we come back in an hour, we'll see what the numbers are then. It is now 2 p.m., time for the final blood glucose test. And we are at 108 at 2 p.m. This is kind of interesting. As a result of the blood glucose tests on the rice, I kind of almost feel an obligation to do a clean test of the rice again, and by that I mean without having already tested the potatoes. Now, I'm not gonna eat just straight up rice again. So I need to figure out a way to make it that isn't gonna add any additional carbs or anything that might somehow, convolute the measurements. Because I really wanna know at this point, is rice as a resistant starch something that a person could incorporate into their low-carb diet? So I'm going to give myself a day or two and then run this test again and hopefully just do a very, very brief video segment on it. Besides the baked potato and the rice that I had yesterday, the only other thing that I ate was a bacon cheeseburger on the keto hamburger bun that Calgary guy and I developed. And when I weighed myself this morning, I was up 3 pounds. When I went to test my blood ketones, I was prepared for a shock, but not this kind of shock. My blood ketone reading this morning was a 1.6. So I actually went up from yesterday morning when I was a 1.1 to a 1.6 despite eating that potato and rice. My blood glucose this morning was, I think it was a 94. I don't remember specifically. So that makes me curious enough about the rice that I'm going to try that again right now. Like the potatoes, the plan is to eat these the way I would in real life. So I put a little bit of Mexican, I think it's chipotle seasoning from Flavor God. So no carbs, no sugar, no maltodextrin, any of that stuff in there. Little shredded cheese and some sour cream. So in total, I'm probably adding 2 grams of carbs to the rice. So I'm going to quick take a baseline of my blood glucose, then I'm going to eat that, and then do my usual blood glucose tests at 30 minutes, 1 hour, and at 2 hours. And we'll grab our baseline blood glucose. We are at 98 at 9:40 a.m. I also threw a couple dashes of Cholula sauce on it, just give it a little more spice. That is infinitely better than plain rice. Final bite. That was good. But it wasn't the rice that made it good. It was the cheese and the sour cream and the hot sauce that made it good. I probably would have enjoyed this just as much, or pretty close to as much, had it been on riced cauliflower. It's 9:45, so at 10:15 I will be back to do my first blood glucose test. And the 30-minute blood test. We are up to 122. So 24 points. That's a bump. It's not a spike. Where the rubber hits the road generally is at 1 hour. So we'll see you then. And the 1 hour blood test. $121. So pretty stable. Interesting. All right, time for the final blood test. I'm very glad it's the final one. After the last 2 days, I feel like a pincushion for the number of times I've stabbed myself here. And we are at 102 at 11:45. So after 2 hours, I am basically back to my baseline. Very close. And I gotta tell you, this was an interesting experience. What I learned, first off, potatoes, still a no-go for me. And that's okay, because after tasting that one yesterday, I realize I don't miss them anymore. Rice, however, this gets me mildly excited because it opens up a lot of potential recipes for me. Knowing now that I can make these low carb and something that has very little impact on my blood glucose, certainly not a spike, and that doesn't knock me out of ketosis, that's some good news to me. That doesn't mean I'll eat rice every day, but it does mean that certain recipes could be back on the table for me, maybe for you. A couple of little asterisks that I want to put by this though. First, I am not claiming that suddenly rice is keto as a result of this. I'm also not claiming that no one will see a blood sugar spike from rice prepared in this way, turning it into a resistant starch. And this is why I bang this drum every single time I do a blood test in one of my videos. My results are my results. They don't necessarily mean that they will be your results. If you want to know how a given food affects you, then I encourage you to use a blood glucose and ketone monitor. The one I use in this video, it's the Keto Mojo. I've been very happy with it. I've done reviews on it. And I'll put a link down in the description. Should you decide you want one, you can get 15% off any Keto Mojo kit. But you don't have to go Keto Mojo. If there's another brand that you have read is better, that you prefer, whatever, I just believe that if you're concerned about your blood glucose, if you're concerned about your ketones, you should have some sort of monitor. If you try out this experiment, I wouldn't do the potatoes, but if you try it out with the rice and you find that you have similar results to mine, I'd love to hear about it down below in the comments. If I find out that enough people are not affected by resistant starch in rice, then I could make some low-carb recipes and videos for those of us that aren't affected. But that's it for this video. It turned out a little bit longer than I expected just because of the whole rice thing. So if you stuck around, thanks for watching.